Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kesgrave Panthers Podcast. Today, our guest is three times British champion, Rachel Lammin. How are you feeling today, Rachel?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's all right. So, we'll start off like normal. So, how did you get into Cycle Speedway?
So I started when I was about 6 or 7, I think. So my dad used to race. So I was always brought up around racing, always ended up going to watch him. And then I think he got me a bike one year for Christmas. It's this little purple and green bike. And then he just basically threw me in at the deep end and chucked me in a junior league one weekend in Newport, where the old track used to be. I think he pretty much showed us on the day how to do it. This is what you do kind of thing, where we'd grown up watching him, and then off I went. And I think I came like second in the C final or something. So I didn't get off to a good start. But yeah, so I started because of my dad.
So what was the first club that you rode for?
So I've always raced for Horspath, never raced for any other club. Although my dad left a couple of times and went to Poole, but I was just never interested. I was just always for Horspath.
So why did you stay at Horspath? Is it because you liked people there, or you particularly liked the track, or like what was it that kept you there?
I don't really know. I think it was more because I love the Poole track. The people at Poole are lovely as well, but I think I'm very homegrown, so I think wherever you start, that's where you should stay. And because girls racing wasn't really a thing when I was younger, so it wasn't as though like I needed to move to another club to be with another female, because I didn't have that opportunity. So I was just more than happy to stay with Horspath.
What other tracks do you like then?
I love Poole. I love Southampton. I like medium-sized tracks that are like not too big, not too small. Obviously, riding at Horspath, it's quite a small track. So you think like 4 laps around Horspath is like, well, it's probably about 8 of Wednesfield. It's crazy. So I prefer the more medium-sized tracks, because otherwise you just end up knackered.
Yeah. So your first British title was the British Girls Championship, I believe, which you won in 2007.
Yeah. So I won that at Horspath.
Oh yeah. So how did it feel when you won that title for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, it felt good. I think so when it first started, they used to run the under-16s and the overs as like a joint category. And then the top scoring under-16 rider won the under-16s. And I remember going into it thinking, oh, I could possibly win both. And then I went out in my first ride and completely fluffed it up. And I think I hit the back of Lucy Whitehead's wheel in my first race, and I ended up coming 4th in that race. And then did really well in the rest of my races. And then I can't remember how many points I finished on, but I think I finished on about 15 or 16 points, and then won the under-16s. And I think I was 3rd in the over one. I can't quite remember, if I'm honest. But yeah, it felt really, really good. I think I was still a bit young with it all, and it was a bit like, not like it didn't really sink in. And it was extremely wet. It absolutely hammered it down the whole day. I remember that I'd put on the British jersey, and as soon as I put it on, I got it covered in mud. And I remember my dad telling me off, being like, oh, you've got it dirty already. But I didn't have no choice. It was just so wet. The track was like a mud pit.
So what do you think about like riding in the wet? What like weather conditions do you prefer?
Well, I prefer dry. I like it when tracks are dry and fast, and like motorways where all the dust has been swept off and they're just nice and smooth. But riding in the wet doesn't bother me, other than the fact you end up eating half the track. And I always ride my mouth open and stick my tongue out most of the time, just out of concentration. I don't realise I'm actually doing it until I look at pictures. So that kind of explains why I end up eating the track half the time.
Yeah. I do that a lot. I honestly, I don't realise I'm doing it, but in every picture of me going into a corner, I've got my tongue stuck out.
Yeah.
It's just so weird.
Yeah, it's crazy. When I raced at Poole the other week, I was going through all the pictures, there must have been about 8 different shots of me with my tongue out. I was just like, brilliant. Not very elegant.
Yeah. So I believe that you may well be the only woman to win the outdoor British, the indoor British, the national title, and the regional title all in the same year. So, like, how does it feel to be the only woman to ever have achieved that?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, it's a good feeling. It's a shame that I couldn't race the year after to try and keep all of them titles. Yeah, but I remember when I won the outdoors, and that was at Hull. And that was an exciting meeting in itself. I fell off on the parade lap. We had to do a qualifier. I had like 4 crashes in the qualifier. It was just, when we went into the final, as soon as I fell off in the parade lap, I just thought, geez, my day just can't get any worse. And I had quite an average draw, but everything just went to plan, and I finished on 19 points, I think it was. So yeah, I mean, that was quite good. And then the indoors, I've always loved the indoors. I just think it's just fast and exciting. And then when they staged that was at Salford. They used to hold it there. I don't know whether you guys have ever been there. No, probably a bit too young. But that was quite good. And back then we didn't have air fences and stuff. So if you hit the board, you just went flying. But the indoors was great. And I won that. I got a 20-point maximum. And it was just a good feeling to win them all in one year. And I think I had quite a tough year because I think my granddad was really unwell that year. And I remember going into the indoors thinking, it was on his birthday as well. And I remember thinking, all I want to do is I just want to win this for him. So I was actually quite emotional winning it, but it was amazing.
So did you have like any expectations going into those 2 events?
I think you always have to set yourself some expectations to kind of level your head off before you go in. So I always try and aim for sort of top 3, but obviously there's always something in the back of your head to think, geez, I could actually win this. But I think you just have to plan it race by race. I went through most of my speedway career trying to like map out my races, thinking, oh, well, if I look like studying the draw, thinking, oh, well, I can get a second in that race, I can win this race. But then I think by doing that, when it didn't go to plan, it used to just like completely mess with your head. And then you've got to plan for the next lot. But I remember in 2010, Jeff Gamage, who's obviously now the Ladies Great Britain manager, he said, oh, stop planning your races, just take each race as it comes. So I remember going into them and he had never shown me the program before the race. I'd always like know what the draw was, but before the race, I wasn't allowed to study. So I wasn't allowed to see what everyone else was on. And you just went with it. He'd say, oh, this is what you got to do. Off you go. And then you just see how the race goes, really.
Yeah. So you won obviously both those titles, but would you say that you prefer indoor or outdoor racing?
I don't know. I love outdoors, but I think indoors is just exciting, and it's a shame that it's only once a year. It's a shame that we can't do like a winter league indoors, because I just think, there's you don't do much training going up to indoors, but then you don't necessarily need to, because you don't need to be fit, because you do like 3 pedals and you pretty much roll the rest. So you don't necessarily need to be fit. So I don't know. I don't know what my preference would be. A split decision, I think.
So do you have a preference then between team riding and individual riding?
Well, for me, because I grew up basically about 1 in 5 of the only girls that actually raced cycle speedway back then. If I ever did team riding, it was always with the boys, like the local boys from Horspath. It was only like the last, literally the last 2 years, I think it was, of me racing, that we actually had women's team racing. And that was obviously just the regional racing that they do now. So for me, individuals were always my focus, but then they were like, you didn't do them very often. We had the British, and obviously growing up, that was with the boys. And then it wasn't until I literally was in, I think it must have started in 2006. I think that's the first women's individual. And then obviously then I focused on that until the team racing came in.
Yeah, so
individuals would definitely would have been my focus growing up.
Yeah, so I have it here that before this year, you last entered the British in 2010, I believe, when you won all those titles. So, like, what made you want to come back and compete this year?
Well, I didn't finish how I wanted to finish. So I don't know whether you know. So I won all of this in 2010. In 2011, the season had started. I'd racing as normal. I did the Welsh Open. I think it was in June. And then had a crash first, like it was a normal racing crash, nothing exciting. It wasn't a big one. I've had far worse. And I actually ruptured my spleen. So soon as I fell off, it was like literally first bend, first race. You couldn't have like planned it any worse, really. But as soon as I fell off, I thought like it just didn't feel right. But I got up and finished the race nonetheless. But as soon as I went back in the pits, like I was in just pure agony with my side and my stomach. So I went to the A&E in Newport, and they were like, oh yeah, well, we think you've ruptured your spleen, and did you know that you were pregnant? And obviously at that time, I didn't know I was pregnant either. So not only I ruptured my spleen, I also had a baby on the way, and I was 16 weeks pregnant as well. So it wasn't as though it was an early one. So it was definitely a shock. So racing stopped obviously straight away. I was in a wheelchair for, well, my whole pregnancy basically with my first child. It was a bit of a nightmare. So coming into this year, it was more, I was away, we were on holiday, and I see, obviously I've known it was going to be at Horspath for quite some time. And I've always thought, oh, I could just do it. But then my husband is always like, wow, you could fall off, you could do this. And like, it's literally taken me 10 years to explain to him it was a freak accident. It could have happened to anyone. And anyway, so we were away and I was like, oh, the drawers come out. And I was like, there's 2 spaces. And he was like, oh, okay. And I was like, no, but there's 2 spaces, like, honestly. So then I looked at the drawer and I was like, oh, so I could get 2 gate 2s or 2 gate 1s. And I was like, it's at Horspath, I've got to do it. So I literally rang up Jeff and I was like, Jeff, what do I need to do? And he's like, oh, you've got to get your license and everything sorted. So as soon as we got back from being away, I rang up British Cycling and registered straight away. And this was 2.5 weeks before the actual event. So what I would usually start training for in March to obviously be your best in August, I started in August to be as good as I could get for the day, really. Yeah, it felt amazing to be back on the bike. But, you know, like, I don't think you ever lose it, but your fitness, like my fitness was completely gone. And I was about 3 stone lighter when I used to race back then. I didn't have kids to think about or work to think about, like it was completely different.
So, like, are there any, do you think things have like changed quite a lot since you used to ride?
The girls train like crazy. Yeah, I think women's racing has progressed massively since I've left and rejoined. There's just so much more out there for the girls. Obviously, they do Great Britain racing now. That's something I never did because we just didn't have enough girls to be able to do it. They obviously do the regional meetings as well. They do pairs. Like, none of this was around when I used to race. So it's really good to see now that the females are getting out there and sort of coming together and pulling a good day's racing.
Yeah. So I believe you haven't entered the Europeans or the Worlds yet. but is
No.
that something like you might aspire to do in the future, really?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know what the future holds. I'm going to keep racing I'll be a veteran by the time I quit now, no doubt. But yeah, I definitely want to enter the bigger events. But obviously before that, I've got to do a lot of work on myself, sort of get fitness back, your gating back. I think your gating's the hardest bit to actually get back, and mine's nowhere near back yet. So yeah, I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm definitely planning on entering some of the bigger events. But it's good now because I don't know what to expect. So although like I've got my own expectations of what I want to achieve, I don't know half of the girls racing anymore. So it's hard to know who you can beat, who you can't beat, like sort of who's going to be up there with you. So I'm learning all of that again as well, which is quite different.
So would you say that you might have like a most memorable moment, like riding or?
I think for me, my most memorable moment would have been when I won the indoors. And like I said, that was only just because it was my grand's birthday. He wasn't very well. And that was all I wanted to do that day. Was I just kept thinking to myself, I've got to win this. I need to win it. So yeah, so for me, that was my most memorable, and it was probably the greatest feeling ever. I remember ringing him up after, and he just literally, like, he was so happy.
Yeah.
I couldn't even get my words out to tell him. It was crazy.
Yeah, so I have Dave Murphy's Cycle Speedway book here, and he has called you or referred to you as a pioneer of women's cycle speedway. So like, how does it feel to be like one of the sort of founding members of that women's cycle speedway?
Yeah, I've got his book as well. I've had a good read of it. I mean, it's great, and I like the fact that he's wrote a good chunk about the women's as well. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there was only about 5 or 6 female riders when I used to race. So I suppose it is quite easy to become a pioneer when there's only that few of you. But yeah, it's nice that your memory is still there and people do remember me as when I used to race.
So
10 years out of the sport is quite a long time.
So do you think like there's anything more that needs to happen for women's racing?
Like more events would be good. It would be good to go back to doing like more team riding events, because I know that, so I think they took the women's team event away and made it into a pairs event because there just wasn't enough teams. So I think it would be good to get that going again in the future. But obviously the only way you can do that is to get more female riders in the sport, and obviously to get enough of you on your team. I think at the moment there's only myself and another young girl at Horspath. So it would be good to get definitely more females involved. And that's something I'll work with the club to try and recruit some new riders.
Yeah. So do you think like it needs more stuff like the Battle of Britain, like the Women's Battle of Britain at the moment, or more individual stuff, do you think?
Definitely the Battle of Britain, because you're bringing everyone together, and even if you've not got enough riders in your club, you're still getting the opportunity to represent your region. And obviously most regions only have 5 or 6 females anyway. So it's good that we can all come together and race against each other on them days. I mean, I've only done one Battle of Britain since I've been back anyway.
So would you say that you have like a favourite meeting then?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I just like riding my bike. Like, I like the physical side of racing. I think I'm quite well known as a more physical rider. And I think that's just because my dad drilled it into me. And I think growing up racing with the boys, you had to be physical, otherwise you'd just get knocked about. But I mean, I competed with the boys and the men until I was about 16, I think. But I don't think there's an actual moment, I don't think.
Yes. So what is like the best advice you've ever been given, or the best advice that you could give to like a younger rider maybe?
Just train. I mean, everyone trains so hard these days, and I think if you want to be up there and you want to be the best, you've got to put the work in. And I mean, yeah, I mean that's what I think anyway. Is you've got to be able to train hard. You need to find the time to be able to do it. And I think track time is so important, because I think you can ride 20-30 miles on your bike on a weekend, but racing cycle speedway is completely different. You use different muscles. It's obviously explosive, quick exercise. It's not long and continuous. So yeah, track time is so important.
So was there anyone that you like looked up to or still look up to now?
From a female perspective, Jessica Lamb, who raced for Paul, she also did a little bit of time at Horspath. She won a couple of British titles, but she was, I think she's about, forgive me if I'm wrong, Jess, but about 12 years older than me. So when I grew up, she was pretty much the only female in the sport, and she always raced with the men at Poole. And she did a bit of motorbike speedway as well. And I remember looking at her thinking, I wanna race like you. I want to be as good as what you are. So it was quite nice when she came to join Horspath, and I did a bit of team riding with her. But yeah, I would definitely say she was my inspiration growing up.
Yeah, so I think we've got quite a good amount tonight. So yeah, thank you for joining us tonight to talk about all of your experiences in the sport, and we hope to see you riding either the Europeans or the Worlds very soon.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, so
thanks for having me.
That's all right. Yeah, so thank you, Charlie, for joining me as usual. And yeah, we will see everybody next time. Goodbye.
Brilliant, thank you.